Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Ford, and we are here for another video, which will be in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one, obviously, the short story discussion playlist, but number two, a short story by short story read-along of the Finca Vigia edition by Ernest Hemingway here. So if you might enjoy a read-along with Ernest Hemingway, consider sticking around for that. This video will have three separate sections: a So What Happened section, where we recap what the story was about, a Lit Crit section, and finally a couple notes down there in the writer's corner, things that we can learn from this short story as a writer. So, Indian Camp, what happened? Nick Adams, his father, and his uncle George take some rowboats out to a Native American camp because of a sick woman. Uncle George brought cigars. The woman had been giving birth, it turns out, for 2 days. Meanwhile, the father of the child being born is in the bunk above her with an injured foot. He cut it with an axe, don't you know? During it all, the man turns to face the wall and is suspiciously quiet. And it turns out Nick's father will have to perform a cesarean section on the woman. The surgery goes well enough, though the mother seems despondent in the aftermath. After explaining a bit of what happened and a bit about birth to Nick, Nick's father decides to turn back and see how the father of the newborn child is doing. And as he pulls the sheet back, the father has slit his own throat. Nick's father apologizes to him for bringing him along to see this as they are rowing away. George has gone missing, but Nick's father does not seem too upset by it, saying that he will show back up. Now, this short story is extremely, in my experience, extremely sort of controversial and not for the whole Indian, Native American, indigenous person thing. So not for the nomenclature involved there, but because Ernest Hemingway had the iceberg principle, which says that 10% of what's going on is on the page. You have to have a deeper understanding of the human experience in order to reach the 90% of the short story. 10% is just words. Everyone who reads this short story has a different idea of what the 10% or what the 90% is, what the short story is about. Nick and his father Nick's father showing him what he does as a doctor, going to indigenous camps, going to Native American camps, and helping with things that need to be done. That's what's on the page. But is that the reason the short story was written? Now, this goes two ways, if you ask me. So I have, down there at the bottom, where's the outrage? That's where I believe the 90% is. But I also think there's like 35% that's on prostate or progeny here. But here is where the controversy lies. And I'm actually going to start with Uncle George the Ladies' Man. Every time I have talked about this short story, someone is dead positive that man in the top bunk took his own life because it's actually Uncle George who was the father of the baby. Uncle George is the guy who brought the cigars. Uncle George is the guy who disappears with the family once everything has gone on. Uncle George is strangely charismatic in the short story. I can't tell you why I want to read more about Uncle George, but I do, right? So that is part of it. But see that number one thing there, ism. If you go online and you look, what's Indian Camp about? Now, the term Indian, at the time that this short story was written, did not have the connotation that it does today. Perhaps it should have, but in larger context, it did not. So, um, the specter of racism gets brought up a lot with this short story. But if it starts there, that's a pretty poor way to start your argument. However, what is being shown here is this group of Native Americans living what seems like in squalor, and the father of the child being born is sort of a screw up, right? He's already cut his foot with an axe, but he's also a coward because the minute he has a child to look after, he takes his own life. Here's the thing. I don't think that's racism. And here's why. The picture being painted is not of all indigenous people. The picture being painted is simply of this instant in this instance in this instant. There is no contextualization of this is just what these people do. This is how these people deal with it. Nick's father never makes that assertion. George uses a racial epithet. That's true. At this time, and again, not to make excuses for anything, but someone has bitten him, and at this time, racial epithets were thrown from anyone to anyone, right? It wasn't what it is today. You can look at all sorts of writing from this era and see that. It was serious to call someone one of those names, but it was just basically on the same level as a four-letter word. It wasn't the same as the elevated status that those words carry in today's society. So, if you want to make the argument that this is a racist text, you can make the argument. That one's a hard one for me to follow. The other argument that is pretty much if you look online for what is this about, if you ask your English professor what is this about, probably 15-20% of the time they'll bring up the race thing. Probably 60-70% of the time you're going to hear that this is a sexist text. Yeah, that's what you're going to hear. There is a line that Nick's father, before turning back to the father of the child being born, says, "Oh, the men normally have the harder deal of this thing." Now, if you have absolutely no idea how men communicate, you can make the argument that that's sexism. Okay. As if Nick's father is legitimately putting that idea out there, but you have no idea how men communicate. All he's doing there is looking for an excuse to go back and check on this guy. That's all. It's an elbow in your ribs. He's ribbing you. That's all. But here is the greater argument around that as far as I'm concerned. So they will say, professors will make the argument that this text is sexist. Look at the women. Look how the women are treated in this text. We've forgotten about the women in this text. Meanwhile, a man has slit his own throat, something that must not be very easy to do. Something that must not be very easy to do. Did it all without making a noise, by the way. Did it all without drawing any attention to himself. What a manly thing to do, right? A man has just ended his own life, and no one seems to care. Who's crying for this man? The family is present. Uncle George knew what went on. Nick's father even says, sorry you had to see that, sheds no tear for this man. So obviously, the bigger deal to anyone paying attention is the fact that now there's a child growing up without a father. That still leaves the father as disposable. No matter who took that man's life, the reaction is for someone else's concern, the child. That is the disposability of men. The disposability of men in this story is still seen as sexist against women. Okay, you want to make your argument, make your argument. Now, prostate or progeny. Is this about masculinity? Because there will be some people who put out there that, well, this is a very masculine text. There's cigars being smoked and people are being cut open. There's blood all over. And look at the way that Nick's father just takes charge, like the sexist that he is. Okay, fine. I think more of what's going on here is that Ernest Hemingway is using this situation to talk about fathers and sons. I don't think that the race of the Native Americans is all that important to Ernest Hemingway here. I think that it is part of the 10% that is above the water, maybe a little bit, because it's something that can draw your attention. You can look at it and say, well, that's just what those people do. But if you do say that, you were immediately forced with the realization that you know someone of whatever your race is that has done those things as well, right? So that becomes easily dispelled. But this is about fathers and sons. Nick has a very good father. This newborn child had a very bad father, a father that will now be completely absent. At the end of the story, this newborn child who almost died to begin with. You don't spend 2 days in labor being born backwards in order only to be birthed through cesarean section and everything be okay, right? This child nearly died to begin with. The short story ends with Nick saying, in the early morning on the lake, sitting in the stern of the boat with his father rowing, he felt quite sure that he would never die. So we have the two extremes here, which are the child nearly not living to begin with, and Nick, who is sure he will never die. The child's father, very bad father, completely absent. Nick's father, a very good father, a father who is showing him how he makes a living, a father who is showing him different things, different parts of the world. This is a type of story also. It's an initiation story, right? Nick being initiated into the world of adults, the world of men, etc. But you also often, a lot of the successful men that you will hear interviewed that come from successful men, very rare, right? A lot of times a man has to build his own wealth to really understand what it's worth. Sometimes a wealthy father is a good father and is able to pass down standards and traditions and things like that to his son. Almost invariably, if you hear interviews with these people about their fathers, there will be a part of their childhood where their father takes them out of their way to show them people who do not have it as good as they do. And they impress upon their son, you are not better than these people. You have it better than these people. Remember that. That is also, I think, part of what Nick's father is doing here. But here's the thing that I think is the majority of that 90% below the surface. Where is the outrage? Where's the outrage? Where's the anger? Where's the sadness? Where's the crying? Who is there for this man in the top bunk who has taken his own life? No one. Not Nick's father, not Nick, not George, but they're outsiders here. What about this woman? So it's a little bit murky as to who is present when this is sort of revealed, when Nick's father takes that cover back, takes back that blanket and reveals what this man has done to himself. It's a little bit murky who is there. But we have no reason to believe that the people who were there, there were two men who rowed the boats for Nick and his father, as well as George, to get out to where these indigenous people are staying. There are, I believe, two women present as well. No one cares. This, to me, says, no, this is not George's child. This is that man's child. But who is he? Is he someone who was not supposed to get her pregnant? Is that what has happened here? And in the wake of his child being born and the shame that will bring upon him, he goes ahead and ends it. Is that what has happened in this short story? It seems to me there is much ado about the woman giving birth, as the people there have gone and retrieved doctors to bring back. There is much ado about the child, as there are cigars being smoked. There's nothing for that father. It seems to me that child was not supposed to happen. These people are more than these people. The people in the story are more than willing to help the child, are more than willing to be the family for the child once the child is born. Nick's father show up to help the woman give birth, and under what seems to be bad circumstances, right? A cesarean section with tools that were maybe not meant for that. No anesthesia either. Is this man who is the father of this child someone who was not supposed to be the father of that child? You see what I'm saying? Is it a family member? Is the girl very young? What's going on there? Why has this man done this to himself? But also, if we're taking into account that he's done this to himself, why does no one else seem to care? So, even when Nick's father reveals what has happened, he doesn't freak out. When he reveals what's happened, he does not immediately have to comfort someone. When he reveals what happened, if the people are not present, he certainly does not send for them. Right? It seems as if the outcome with the father here was a little bit to be expected. Now, Writer's Corner. On page, we're doing the Finkavigia edition, page 69 here. We have dialogue between Nick and his father that I think is a very good example of ultra truth. Nick's, do ladies always have such a hard time having babies? Nick asked. No, that was very, very exceptional. Why did he kill himself, Daddy? I don't know, Nick. He couldn't stand things, I guess. Do many men kill themselves, Daddy? Not many, Nick. Do many women? Hardly ever. Don't they ever? Oh, yeah, they do sometimes. Daddy? Yes. Where did Uncle George go? He'll turn up all right. Is dying hard, Daddy? No, I think it's pretty easy, Nick. It all depends. That all feels very natural and very realistic. It seems there is a lot of verisimilitude to that. It is not real. Now it feels very real because, like real conversation, Nick is not afraid to change the subject whenever it is that he has another question, whenever it is he feels his father has properly answered the question that he had. But you're jumping from is having do women always have a hard time having these babies to the question of a man ending his own life to why don't women do that as well to is dying hard. That might be a natural progression, but would that all happen in such a short time with so few words? So when I say ultra truth, one of the things that Hemingway is very good at doing is whittling back any words that are not necessary to communicate the ideas that he's trying to communicate. Not the things, right? The things are part of it, but what he's doing is giving you only what you need, almost like a dream. So John Gardner in The Art of Fiction refers to fiction as a vivid and continuous dream, which is as good a descriptor for fiction as I have ever heard. But in dreams how sometimes you just wake up and you're in the school, not wake up, I guess, but you're in the school and then you are all of a sudden in the lunchroom, but you never walked to the lunchroom from your classroom. You just accept it. Ernest Hemingway's writing is very good at getting you to just accept the next step. You just sort of end up there. Now, how do I communicate that as a writer's note? I have no idea because it's basically voodoo. How he does that is your guess is as good as mine. But this last line of the story, we read it earlier. In the early morning on the lake, sitting in the stern of the boat with his father rowing, he felt quite sure that he would never die. Don't do that. Not because it's bad, it's very good. What a way to end a short story. Mere mortals can't write that way. We can't do it. We put something like that on paper, and all of a sudden it's try hard. Hemingway was able to do it flawlessly, and do it 4 or 5 times in every story that he wrote. How? No one's quite sure. But what I'm saying is, don't do it because it's almost impossible. So, if you can put little buttons like that in your short story, if you can, you owe it to the world because Ernest Hemingway has lived since these stories were published, and he will live as long as the English language is read, and it's because of things like that. This is one of those lines that would be very easy to say, okay, well, that's what Ernest Hemingway wants us to get from this. It's about life and death. But it's not just about life and death. Because in this sentence, Nick is coming down from the high that he reached watching his father work, which was a repulsive high, right? He was, hey, distance here. I feel like I'm going to throw up. But in that state of mind, you're very, it's a high. And here he is, with imbued with all of the wisdom of his father, making a very unwise statement. All of this new wisdom that is coursing through his life. And he's saying one of the dumbest things that young people often believe, that he will never die. There is an irony there, you know? And Hemingway was as good at that as anybody. That is all I have for this, the Indian Camp from the Finca Vigia edition. If you like or appreciate what I do here on the channel, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel. We're currently reading through Dubliners by James Joyce. We're currently going poem by poem through Sylvia Plath. There is always Charles Bukowski to be had on the channel, as well as Emily Dickinson. There's poetry every Monday, by the way. So, hey, I hope to have you back for the next one.